The family of 12-year-old Tamir Rice say they are devastated after an Ohio grand jury decided not to indict the officers involved in shooting and killing their son when they mistook his toy gun for a real one. Here to discuss is the attorney for the Rice family, Jonathan Abadi. Mr. Abadi, thank you for joining us. And first of all, please send our condolences and comfort to the family. I can imagine this is very difficult for them. Were they entirely shocked? How did they react to the news yesterday?
Well, the reaction was one of tremendous and extreme disappointment, disillusionment, demoralization, but it was not thoroughly a surprise. We saw this, unfortunately, coming many, many months ago. It was clear to us from interaction with the prosecutor that this entire process was being distorted and corrupted and directed in a way that would engineer a no indictment in this case.
In fact, the family even said in the statement that they believe that the prosecutor in the case deliberately sabotaged the proceedings. Those are strong words.
They're very strong words, and no one takes pleasure in observing that there's been a tremendous failure or compromise in a process of this sort. But we have to be honest, we have to be candid, and we looked at this and saw it from very close range, and it's very clear to us that there was an abuse of the grand jury process, that this prosecutor wholly abandoned his obligation to be an advocate for the crime victim and became actually a defense lawyer for the police. And that is extremely upsetting, not just to the family, but it should be upsetting to the Cleveland community and to the nation as a whole. The problem of police violence is a horrible problem that is plaguing this country. Every time we turn on the TV or open the newspapers, we see another example of police violence, frequently in communities of color. And it's not going to stop until people are held accountable.
In terms of accountability, we know that the city of Cleveland is under a consent decree, which means there'll be federal oversight of all the practices in that department. We also know there's an ongoing federal review by the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. Is the family at all hopeful that any of this could provide some measure of justice or closure for them, or do they plan on pursuing other avenues?
Well, the family does retain some degree of hope. We have asked for the federal government through the Department of Justice to intervene in this case. It's an unusual and extraordinary measure, but the federal government and the Department of Justice are there precisely for these kinds of circumstances. When there is a failure on the part of local law enforcement of this sort, the federal government is there as a backstop. And so the family is hopeful that the federal government is going to intervene in the same way that it's intervening now in Chicago. We think that the conduct here was so egregious and so misguided that it warrants federal intervention. And we're also pursuing a federal civil rights lawsuit. And so we're determined, and the family is determined, to obtain some measure of justice in this case. It's a horrible tragedy. 12-year-old child shot for no reason, completely unjustified, completely unreasonable.
You know, I was listening to the prosecutor, Tim McGinty. He called the case a, quote, perfect storm of human mistakes. How do you react to that?
You know, we're supposed to live in a democracy, not in a police state, and a police state where officers are judge, jury, and executioner with impunity. This case, at a minimum, is criminally negligent or criminally reckless homicide. At a minimum, it's the definition of criminally negligent or criminally negligent homicide. And in fact, the Ohio legislature passed a specific provision in its criminal code allowing for aggravated murder charges where the victim is less than 13 years old. So the idea that this is some accident or a perfect storm, to us, is ludicrous and an unnecessary apology for police officers who should be held accountable to the same rule of law that we all are. The fact that you carry a badge and wear a uniform doesn't give you a free pass. You're supposed to be subjected to the same laws that we're all subjected to. So I find those comments by the prosecutor to be very disturbing.
As an attorney, do you question the grand jury process? Do you have doubts about it? Do you wonder if it's the wrong way to pursue justice?
Well, the grand jury process is a secretive, highly discretionary process. There's a very famous saying that a prosecutor could indict a ham sandwich
Yes.
if he or she wanted. And that's a function of the tremendous influence and control that prosecutors exercise in the grand jury process. No other lawyers are allowed in there. It takes place in secret. And so the reality is it's all in the way that the case is presented by a prosecutor. And in this case, this prosecutor took a year. And during that year, he was engineering, it's very clear to us, he was engineering a very particular result. And so what I would say to you is the grand jury process is a highly imperfect process, and it's subject to tremendous manipulation and influence. And unfortunately, that manipulation and influence frequently gets exercised in favor of the police in an unfair way when they're being investigated by prosecutors.
Jonathan Abedi, thank you so much for joining us. Again, I can't imagine what that family is going through right now. I think there are many that are sending their best to that family, mourning the loss of their 12-year-old. There's no way around that.
Well,
that's devastating for anyone. Thanks for joining us today on New Day.
It's very much appreciated. Thank you very much.
All right, Christine, over to you.
Michaela.
I'm the leading state sponsor of terrorism.